Greetings. I'm Josh Tyson, co-author of the first best-selling book about conversational AI, Age of Invisible Machines. The book explores the learnings of conversational AI veteran and OneReach.ai CEO Robb Wilson. Each week, Robb and I bring in a guest to continue the conversation we began in the pages of our book. This week on the Invisible Machines podcast, we're talking about why, even in an automated world, people won't stop performing rote activities, how much of creativity hinges on real human effort, and designing a future where technology improves the quality of our decision-making and reduces burnout. Our guest is Gloria Mark. Gloria is the professor of informatics at University of California, Irvine, and for decades she's been studying technology use in real-world environments she describes as living laboratories. Her book, Attention Span, looks for ways that we can live with and use technology while maintaining a healthy psychological balance. She's been featured on NPR's Hidden Brain, The Ezra Klein Show, and CBS Sunday Morning, and we are thrilled to bring you this fascinating conversation with Gloria Mark. Gloria, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We are really, really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and Robb, pleasure as always seeing you.
Yeah.
So Gloria, you've done incredible research into human attention, and really your findings and your thinking have opened a lot of doors of thought for us. So we thought to start off that we could just kind of ask sort of a foundational question, I guess. What is all this technology in our lives doing to our attention?
Well, it's not an easy, straightforward question to answer. One of the things it's doing is it's getting us stressed and exhausted because, we have access to more information now than we've ever had before historically. And we have more access to people as well. And so whenever we enter the digital world, that's the metaphor I'd like to think about, we become immersed in just a sea of possibilities of finding information, connecting with people. And, on the one hand, it's great, right? It's wonderful. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of pressures. People report being exhausted. One of the things that I found in my research is that people tend to switch their attention a lot. There's lots of reasons for that, but, we switch between tabs, between applications, between devices. And whenever we switch our attention like that, it adds to stress and it impacts our ability to pay attention. So, it sort of like chips away at our attention because instead of having this kind of continuity of thought about what you're looking at, there's a lot of disruptions in it. And every time we turn our attention to some new piece of content, we have to reorient our attention. And just to go a little bit further into this, I also like to use the metaphor that people have a tank of cognitive resources, right? You have a good night's sleep, which is not so common. But imagine you wake up, you have a full tank of cognitive resources. You can think of it as attentional capacity. And then as the day wears on, these resources slowly drain, right? If something requires hard focus or you have a conflict with someone, all of these things drain your resources. And then slowly throughout the day, right, you have less and less in your tank that you can use to pay attention.
Is it literally calories? Like, is it at a neuroscience level? Like, is it calories? Is it dopamine? Is it?
No, it's, there is a neuroscience basis to this theory of having a tank of cognitive resources. And it has to do with blood flow in the brain. And that appears to be a metabolic index of how cognitive resources are being used. So if people are in a laboratory and they're focused for a long period of time, they can actually detect changes in the blood flow. And this is theorized to indicate that people's cognitive resources are being expended. We also know from a performance perspective that the longer people are performing a task, and these are studies that have been done for decades in laboratory research, that performance degrades, right? And there needs to be an explanation. Why would performance degrade if you're doing something? Why wouldn't it get better? Sometimes it does, but if it's a hard task, it's the idea that we have a limited set of cognitive or attentional resources, and these are being used up,
Right.
by paying attention to this task.
It sounds like too what you're saying is like some of these like rote tasks that we do over and over again, we maybe start paying less and less attention to, which is sort of a central idea to I think the way that we've kind of positioned technology, or at least how we'd like to see it evolve, to where if you start letting AI automate some of these tedious tasks that kind of take up a lot of people's days, they have more space to kind of interact, hopefully, with other people. And then there's also this idea of kind of pogo sticking between apps, as you were describing, like moving from Slack to email to social media to a web browser. Conversational AI kind of provides opportunities to where people could just kind of have a single conversational interface. Could be a rich web chat web chat window that they type into, or something, the speaker that they actually speak to, and that they could almost have like conversational AI as an ally that could kind of help them find the information they need without having to jump around a bunch of different windows. So I don't know if you've thought about that technology in those terms, but do you think there might be opportunities for AI to kind of declutter our lives a little bit? I know there's a very founded fear of it kind of adding more clutter with generative AI kind of churning out a lot of text and artwork, but we feel like there might be an opportunity to kind of flip the script. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think it can declutter our minds. But the question is, will it free up extra time for us? Or is AI just simply going to produce more information that people are going to have to process? And, we have a limited capacity to process information. And, there's a bottleneck. So AI can produce all this information, but there's ultimately a bottleneck limitation of how much humans can comprehend and take in. And so then the argument is, well, let's have AI agents talk with each other, and then just that the human gets pulled out of the loop. Well, that's fine, but then the human is really separate from the information. We're not in touch with what that information is. So I think that people do need to still be in touch with that information. But the danger I worry about is that so much information will be produced that ultimately, humans are going to have a hard time
keeping up, right?
Understanding, keeping up with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like, we're big fans of this idea of human in the loop, that, at least allowing two AIs to talk, but us being able to observe the conversation and moderate and ultimately overrule or decide is important. But to your point, I think a lot about like the future, the more like immediate future of AI with human in the loop, which I think will be an integral part of that, because we do want to be in the loop, and I think we're making that clear by even instituting laws around it right now already. So seems very clear. This is what humanity wants, to be in the loop. But I almost imagine like this day, your day is just decision, and I think about what you're saying, which is like the Obama, like having two suits, the gray and the blue one, so that he doesn't waste any cognitive load on a decision that doesn't matter. So he saves it all. And it's clear that he's aware of his own limitation, which, it's very easy for me to pattern recognize here and say it looks a lot like physical. It's a muscle, and it feels a lot like we physically only can do so much in a day before becoming exhausted. It's caloric. It's a lot of things that ultimately add up to being tired, and the more tired we are, the less we are able to function. If you're doing like 100 squats and then I ask you to walk a tightrope, that's going to be way harder than waking up early in the morning and trying to do it with fresh legs. And so it seems that it feels very similar to me, even though if physiologically it's different, it feels very similar. It's like we're in the coal mines for our brain and cognitively now. Like before we were actually in the coal mines and we were exhausted and we had to shorten our day so that we could rest our bodies. And now we're in like the cognitive coal mine. And I'm a little worried that we're with human in the loop and the AI's ability to just get the thunking, which, I'm using somebody else's term, but I heard, I forget what your term is for thunking, but it's the routine tasks that don't take a cognitive load that help us recover. What did you call that?
Road activity.
Yeah, road activities, exactly. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that term. That if we remove the rote activities from our day, then we're just going from cognitive decision to cognitive decision to cognitive decision, exhausting ourselves, being like, oh my God, this is like worse than the coal mine. This is, breaking our brains. And if we're going to do this 8 hours, like are we all just going to be depressed because we're like slaves, building the pyramids? I don't know. Maybe I'm going too dark here, but that's my fear. Is not that AI intentionally does anything wrong. It's that it ends up becoming such a case of no more rote activities, no more recovery, and just back to back decision making.
Yeah, I worry less about that because I think that humans if we have a desire to do road activity, I don't think people would stop doing that. Why do we do it? Because it relaxes us. My research shows that people are happiest when they do road activity. They're happier than when they do hard focused work because it's not stressful.
I can relate
road
to that.
Activity, it plays a role for us because if you have a hard problem and you're just, churning it over and over in your mind, if you step back from that problem, and even doing some simple kind of road activity, the problem is still churning in the back of your mind and it's incubating.
Yeah.
And then that's why when we go back to a problem after stepping away, sometimes the solution seems quite clear.
Yeah.
So I don't think people would stop road activity. I think our desire to do simple, easy, engaging activity is just too strong.
Good.
Yeah, my life's improved ever since I got a cordless vacuum. Like, I'm always just like, if I have a problem that I'm trying to figure out in my head and I just wander around the house, vacuuming up piles of dog hair, it doesn't take long before I've kind of arrived at the answer, which points to something that Rob and I were kind of talking about before this call, that we're talking a bit about kind of AI sort of designing our schedules for us maybe. But there's also this element of, do we want them to like lighten the load in this current paradigm that we live in? Or should we also be thinking about ways that we could use AI to kind of build a new model for productivity where we're not kind of feeling like, we're keeping busy just to show off for someone, for a superior or something like that, where it's a little more balanced and there's more of a focus on the quality of work over the quantity and those kind of things.
I think that's the real challenge in the age of open AI is what's the best way to utilize humans' skills and human reasoning, and what's the best way to integrate with AI. And I think it's going to take some time for us to figure that out. And there's going to be new skills that need to be developed. For example, skills in prompts. Some people are better skilled at entering prompts than others. Even for search engines, I was surprised. I thought everyone knows how to use search engines. But it turns out they don't. Some people are better than others. So I think it's a skill to be developed. It's also going to be a skill to figure out how much AI can be integrated into work, right? It's also going to be a skill to be able to figure out hallucinations from AI. Should we just blindly trust it and accept it, or should we be really diligent in checking it? So there's a lot of new ways of thinking that are going to be needed to be developed.
Yeah, we had this. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say, you talk a lot about like designing your day, like being sort of more intentional about your attention. And I think I'm caught up on it because in some ways I almost think like studying attention is like the meaning of life in a way. Everything rolls up to attention and what you're doing and how you're feeling in any given moment and what you're paying attention to. And your idea of, designing by intention, like designing your day in advance, it brings me back to a project. I was hired a long time ago by a company. This was pre-Facebook, where it was a scrapbooking company that was like the largest scrapbooking company in the world in terms of like selling scrapbook materials and stuff. And they sort of saw that, their business model was being disrupted potentially by the internet because people were not creating physical scrapbooks anymore. They were doing this in a digital form, and they were trying to figure out how to, conserve that revenue, which whole nother interesting concept, like why they never became Facebook was because they tried to make money, and that it was all money based. But when I did the project and we did our research and we got to dig into this scrapbooking community and what was scrapbooking about and why did people do it and what engaged them with it, and it turned out that the number one reason had nothing to do with sharing as much as we thought. That was the number two reason, but the number one reason had to do with the fact that whenever you design a page, you begin to proactively think of what you want the next page to be. The number one takeaway from our research was that that the designing of your scrapbook page wasn't about the reflecting back, but it became about imagining what you want the next page to be, and then living your day to end up with the page that you want. And so it became, scrapbooking was lost. It wasn't a thing that was this artistic endeavor as much as it had more meaning, and it was about living life intentionally and trying to create the next page to be the page you're proud of. And so they would plan events, imagining the photos that they would be able to take and the trinkets they would be able to add to their scrapbook. And it was so interesting to me to see the value of scrapbooking had nothing to do with the scrapbook and everything to do with what you talk about, which is being proactive about designing your experience for your day or the next day, and that being like an interim, let's say management of the world we live in, knowing that we can't just shut all the devices off.
Yeah. No, I really love that. And I love what you started with when you said attention is really about life. I think of William James, who's considered the father of psychology. And he talks about attention in the sense of it's what we consciously pay attention to. So there's this volition, this conscious effort involved in choosing what to pay attention to. And according to William James, right, everything we pay attention to becomes part of our lived experience. And so it's really important what we selectively choose to pay attention to. The other thought that comes to mind when you spoke about how in these scrapbooking communities, people think about what they want their life to be, right? And these images are representing to them aspects of their lives. I think about the idea of forethought, that imagining our future selves. And so, we tend to just be so embedded in what we're doing now, and we're stressed, and we can't figure out, what's the next step of this current project. But if you really jump ahead and you think a little bit into the future and you imagine what that future ideally should look like, that can help you guide what you do in the present.
Yeah.
So, if I'm struggling with deadlines and, I've got emails that, people are expecting me to answer, and I've got, 4 different deadlines and I'm juggling back and forth between them. If I think ahead and imagine what my end of day is going to look like, how do I want to be at the end of the day? Or how do I want to be at the end of the week? And, I imagined I want to be relaxed. I want to feel fulfilled. But also emotionally, how do I want to feel? Right? And that's part of it too.
Right.
And that can help this kind of future thinking, even not very far ahead, the end of the day, end of the week, can help inform what we do now and help us make better choices now. So it's really about what we pay attention to, being selective, and knowing that all of this is going to contribute to experience that comprises who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. One little tidbit that was interesting is that the further that they looked forward, and this is something that we had learned more through the research than actually watching, the further they looked forward about their future self, the more altruistic it was for them, meaning it was as if they were planning someone else's life. And the less motivated they were to do anything in the meanwhile, because it wasn't for their present self, it was for someone else. And that the next day, like, there was a window of time for planning that was more motivating because it was their present self versus like someone else, their future self. And that was just sort of interesting, and it just wanted to share that. Where what I want to circle back to, though, is instead of AI planning our days for us and designing our days for us like nanny AI, it makes me think it's that the more immediate term value isn't just maybe interrupting us, so to speak, to force us to do that planning. Like maybe it's just a coach. Like it'd be like having, you on speed dial every morning, like, okay, I'm going to walk you through, like, let's design your day. And it's almost like making an AI of you that everyone could spend 15 minutes or throughout the day and you remind them of, like, don't forget, how do you want your day to look? And this, Josh, comes back to, some of the research that was done in our company around journaling.
I was just thinking of that, yeah.
Yeah, and how getting folks to journal from a mental health standpoint was so valuable. But not only that, but like the AI's job was to summarize their journals and then say it back to them in a more positive way so that they could feel better about their day and not worse. And that the way we write, if we're in a negative mode, we may journal towards a negative spin on our day, but that if something read it back to us, but took a positive spin on it. It's still truthful, but a positive spin on it. It was amazing how much more positive the results were and how helpful that was to folks. And so I'm just thinking like having like this AI coach versus nanny, right? And maybe that would be like a great place to start with AI. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I totally agree. And in fact, I write about having an AI agent as a coach. It's exactly that, what I talk about. I do believe that we humans should be the ones that plan our days. And I see AI as being support to coach us, right? To help us understand what our peak attention times are, when are the times that we need a break, what's the right task fit for the amount of attention we have. This is something that AI could certainly help us with. But there are a few reasons why we should be designing our own days. And one of those is, we would be more committed to following that plan if we design it ourselves, rather than having an external agent do it, because we're always more committed when we make our own decisions, right? And another thing is it empowers people to be able to, figure out what you should be doing when, rather than just completely offloading it to some, external agent. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Well, that points to like a great value of conversational AI is that the technological barriers are lowered now, so that it's totally designable, an experience where someone collaborates with an AI to kind of create their optimal schedule, and that schedule changes daily in response to things that they have coming up. And then there's also like this one thing that I wanted to mention about that journaling research that Rob mentioned was that the people who participated, a lot of them had saved the little summaries that were given back to them by the AI and considered them precious, because they had actually, that more positive spin on whatever they put in their journal kind of became their new reality. So there is, and obviously that is clearly a double-edged sword, but there is that power too, that like not only could these AIs be helping us make better use of our time, they could make us feel better about what we're doing, where it would be appropriate.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's fascinating. I also see another value for people designing their own day is that they would learn from it, right?
Right.
So I'm a big believer of people doing things themselves. We learn from our mistakes. We learn from our successes. If we offload everything to a piece of software, right, we're not going to learn from that.
Yeah.
And that software, this AI is going to tell us, here's what you should be doing at this time and this time and this time. We're not going to learn why this is important. But if we do it ourselves, right, and we have an AI coaching us to say, well, consider that you've got a lot of attentional resources at this time. Consider that, you've got this and this task that could benefit from a lot of attention. And then, it would help us make better choices. We would learn. We would begin to understand a lot more deeply about how our own attention works. So, I'm not a fan of outsourcing everything to AI.
You mentioned earlier, before we got started here, that you have an article coming out to talk more about like sort of creativity and how it relates to this. And I don't know how exactly, with I'm making a connection in my mind between like, if I design my day, that's creative. If AI designs my day, is that creative? I don't think so. And how that crosses over with this article, I'm not exactly sure, but there feels to be like there's some connection here between the idea that it inspires me to create my day. That's me creating. It created it for me. That's not creativity. And I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there is a basic connection there that, we can be creative in many different ways, right? We can be creative if you're doing a painting, if you're writing a poem, but we can also be creative in planning things, planning an event or even planning your day. When I was writing about creativity, and this is actually for a Substack post that will probably appear by the time your episode comes out.
Great.
Was actually in response to a very interesting event. So in mid-January, there was a Japanese author who won a very prestigious award in Japan for Best Work of Fiction for New Writer. And her book was called The Tokyo Tower of Sympathy. Well, what's unusual about this award was that she used ChatGPT in writing the book. Now, she used it for about 5% of the writing, and she faithfully quoted the AI output in the novel.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is like we're entering a new frontier here. And of course, there's a number of different entities that are not in favor of this, like the Writers Guild of America, right? The New York Times. But, the ship has sailed and we're using AI in so many ways. But the question I'm asking is, can a work of art, whether it's a novel or a poem or a painting, can it be considered creative if AI is used for part of it or all of it? And, what about just issuing a command and asking AI to rewrite a Chekhov play, right? And if the output seems to be very creative, does that make it creative?
And would the impact be different? Like even if humans performed it, like would that somehow come through the AI-ness of it?
Well, that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
So, I was originally trained as an artist. And when I would look at a painting, say a Rembrandt painting, what struck me about the painting was that I could understand the effort that Rembrandt went into that painting. I could see what Rembrandt was envisioning because it comes across on the canvas. And so there's the humanness in that art that for me makes it creative. And so a lot of this is about what is really disclosed about how that piece of art is created. So if it's disclosed, and I think that's really central, that there needs to be disclosure. If it's disclosed that this AI work, let's say a rewritten Chekhov play, occurred simply from a command that was issued, right? And if I knew that, then I would not perceive that work as being creative because it lacks the human effort. And so for me, what's really central is knowing that there's humanness that's involved in the production of that work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My oldest son is a jazz musician, so we kind of talk about this a lot in the house, but like, there's AI that can do jazz improvisation, but it's hard to imagine a scenario where anyone would want to pay to go watch that happen. He had a concert the other night where it was hard for me to even like speak because I was overcome with emotion because he was up there essentially telling stories about his life through song. But part of me wonders if this saturation of kind of generative content, in certain areas it'll diminish probably the overall quality of written works out in the world, but it might also create more of an appetite for these authentically human experiences of like watching live music or seeing like an actual painting where
I have
is
kind of two perspectives on this. One is the idea that is it the painting or the story that we're paying for? is it that humans love paintings or that humans love stories? And so we're buying the story, and if the story's a lie, right? If somebody makes up a story that's not true about how the painting came to be, and then we buy that story and that's a false story, we feel cheated. The same way that someone might write a fictional book and say it's a true story, and we would feel cheated. Like you lied, it's a deception, and a deception is not a good idea. We don't feel good about being deceived, and so if you disclose it's an AI and the painting has no good story other than somebody who wanted to make money pressed a button, I don't want that painting because I don't like that story, because I need a story, beyond just a thing. And if I'm just looking to throw a picture up somewhere to hide a hole in the wall, then maybe I will buy an AI because I don't really care. But I definitely agree with you. I need to know. I will feel deceived if told a lie about how that painting came to be, because I'll tell other people that story and they'll turn me into a liar essentially.
Yeah, I think our perception of what makes something creative has to do with the degree to which we can identify with the process of how this thing is produced. So, when I hear a John Coltrane piece, I can imagine him behind it, him playing it. And I can imagine just the brilliance in his mind. And I discovered he has this amazing ability to be able to keep tempo. Even if he veers off and does improvisation, he can come right back and pick up the tempo, which is just, and of course AI would be able to do the same thing. But when we hear that a human is behind it, right, and we understand that, there's something about that we really identify with. And to me, that makes the creativity much more profound.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a story, you guys might know it better than I do, about it's a pretty famous documentary out there about a winemaker that basically was able to disguise old wines. He's able to replicate old wines and then sell them. And they were so accurately created that they themselves were a work of art, right? Because they were so accurate to what the original wine was. But he still went to jail, right? And his rationale was, well, if the end person couldn't tell, then is it wrong? And of course, I think the court said, yeah, because eventually they did find out. And that's the problem, is you can't guarantee they won't find out. And so, yes, it's wrong, and yes, you're going to jail. And I can't help but think this is exactly the same thing. It's fine if AI creates art, so long as you tell us that that's what it is. But if you sell me on a story that somebody overcame adversity as being a minority in a really, difficult situation and ends up being a musician at a level that supersedes almost any other musician or many others, and then I get to hear them and go, wow, like that, I don't want to find out that was an AI. That's not okay, and you should go to jail if you sell me his album.
What worries me is that AI will become so often used in producing art that we simply become inured to the fact that it's produced by a machine. And so I don't want us to lose touch with the human quality that goes into art, the human effort, right? And it's that identification with that human thinking process that really makes something creative. And I don't want us to forget that. And that's what worries me, is that, sure, I can imagine, people will start to pay really big money for paintings produced by AI.
Right.
And they simply lose touch with the fact that where was the human process involved?
I feel like the novelty hopefully might wear off quickly. I can remember kind of early in the generative AI wave, there was a series, I don't know if it was the same person doing them, but people were releasing these fake trailers to Wes Anderson versions of like popular movies. So there was like Wes Anderson's Star Wars. And the first one I saw was, it seemed quite novel and it was really funny and it was kind of fascinating to watch. But then, after 2 or 3 of them, the note had gone sour. And I am hopeful that maybe that could happen too, that it seems inevitable just given the way that kind of the mechanics of Hollywood work, right? And like how formulaic certain storytelling approaches are, that AI won't be folded into the mix. But I wonder if there will be kind of a rejection of the output because it might have like a weird sense to it almost. Like sometimes I can tell like when people have sent me emails that were written by, generative AI. So I wonder if maybe
people become used to things, right?
Yeah.
And we tend to like what we're familiar with. And so people may end up just accepting it because it's familiar. It's, it will become part of our culture.
Yeah. When I guess then it also becomes quickly part of this thing that we're trying to debug, right? It's just another thing competing for our attention. If all it takes to make a 2-hour movie is to like feed a paragraph prompt into an AI, then it's not, we're going to be flooded with, and it might be personalized movies. You might get on some sort of newsletter where every day you're getting a new movie starring you fed to you. And like, how do you break away from something like that?
Yeah, it certainly saves companies money. So they're incentivized to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a funny thing. If you think about, maybe it's just a phase, right? Or in some cases, it's a phase. Like you think about the Rolex watch, and then you think about the status symbol of owning and wearing a Rolex watch. And then you go to counterfeit Rolexes just being sold everywhere. And then everyone suddenly wearing a Rolex watch. And now, did counterfeiting replace? We still need the story. It wasn't the same. It didn't take off and ruin the watch. We still care about craftsmanship. But there was that moment where we could fool people from a status symbol standpoint, which I don't know if you want to call that art appreciation. That's like a whole nother episode probably to talk about whether that counts as art appreciation. But there's something about status that once there's no status attached to it anymore because you can't tell, what the original is, that almost we go back to the Rolex. I mean, it's still around, but it has less status around it now. And now we see that people just, the Swatch watch comes out and now we want uniqueness. We don't want counterfeit status symbols. So it seems like it sort of takes the status away, and then we circle back to that creativity and uniqueness being what matters, and maybe not everyone wearing a Rolex to say, look how successful I am, but now we want the watch that matches our personality. I don't know. It just seems like there is maybe an element of just temporariness to all of this, that we're just going to not value art in the same way in the future, but we're going to buy the art that we, like the most.
Well, the liking is very subjective. And I'm sure there are people that would like AI-produced work and would probably pay a lot of money for it. I would hope that's not the case. I would hope that human-produced art would still, be worth money and people would value it. But it's, culture changes. Culture influences our perceptions of things. AI is all around us. And so there's, just think of it as just a huge wave that we're being engulfed in. And of course, it's going to affect the way we view things.
Actually, I found this quote yesterday. A friend was recommending that I read some Douglas Hofstadter, and he wrote a book called Metamagical Themas. He had this quote, in this day and age, how can anyone fascinated by creativity and beauty fail to see in computers the ultimate tool for exploring their essence? Which I guess that quote kind of feels like we've already discussed it to the marrow, perhaps, but there is this notion that, and I think it actually plays into what we were talking about, like if you are co-creating with an AI to design your optimal day, that has sort of the flavors of art in a way. Like we've had conversations on this podcast. Actually, we should definitely introduce you to Laura Herman, who's been a guest on this podcast. She works with Adobe and is a researcher at Oxford, but we spent a lot of time talking about how important story is, to the art that's being produced. And then about the idea of like conversation in and of itself is almost a form of art, because I'm saying something and you're formulating a response and we're having this exploration. So it's almost like it could have art-like qualities, right? Like using AI constructively and collaboratively to kind of create your optimal schedule, which is in essence like creating the kind of attention you want to have. There could be an artistic element to that, I suppose. What do you think about that?
I think so. I think there could be. So as long as the human is involved and the human is not left out, but the human, you're talking about a kind of co-construction with the machine and the human producing the day. And how that co-construction appears could be an art. To what how is the human guiding the AI to help them produce their day, design their day? So definitely, I think there could be art involved in that.
Yeah, but I guess it feels like to get there too, we kind of need to break free from sort of the hamster wheel of productivity that's been baked into our work lives and our professional lives. And that might be... There
is that, absolutely. I mean, we are told that, we live in this culture where producing, and it's a lot of it is based on quantity and not quality. But the more we produce, the better it is. Let's push ourselves to our limits. We're given tools, after all, to help our productivity. We're given computers and an AI that can help us push ourselves to the limit. But what's being left out here is our well-being, right? That's being neglected. And, as I talked about earlier, that, the human mind is still a bottleneck, right? There's just a limit to what humans can do. And when we, exceed the limits of what our capacity is, that's where we get stressed, we get exhausted, we get burned out. And so we're being pushed to the edge. And that's why there is so much burnout and stress that people are experiencing. In fact, stress is at an all-time high. Burnout and exhaustion is very common. And managers and companies need to realize that, because it's actually more expensive for them when employees are burned out. There's absenteeism, of course, but there's also a lack of presenteeism. In other words, even if you show up at work, but you're stressed and exhausted, you're not going to perform at your best. You're not going to be motivated. You're not going to be engaged. So you're just burned out. So yeah, I think we need to rethink this whole culture of just pushing productivity and pushing people to their limit.
Yeah. It feels like so much of our identities are kind of wound up in how much we can accomplish in our lives. Rob and I were kind of talking about, I guess it was Steve Jobs the other day, and how I think at the end of his life, and he had the terminal illness, he was able to kind of do some reflecting. And from what I remember, kind of his last keynote or presentation that he gave, the main takeaway was like, I blew it. Like, I should have spent more time with my family. And he's someone who I think a lot of people point to as like kind of a god of productivity, or of like, getting the most out of your life, right? Like, he created so many groundbreaking things, but at the end of it, his realization was like, I misspent my energy. My attention was squarely focused in the wrong area. And it's a strange, jagged pill to swallow, I guess, because were the things that he released on the world what we actually needed, right? Like, we're kind of in a moment, Gloria was hinting at it, like, we're more stressed than we've ever been. Everyone seems stretched thin. Our lifestyles seem utterly unsustainable from both like a macro and a micro level.
Yeah, the cognitive coal
Yeah,
mine.
like
Yeah.
could like the simple act of using AI to kind of reframe our attention have downstream effects of like maybe initiating some of the systemic change that I think is probably necessary to really have like a healthy relationship with work and a healthy relationship between humans and our environment.
So I think there's a premise built into AI that is going to help us achieve more, be more productive. But what if there were a different premise built into AI, which is, how can it help us be more peaceful, have greater well-being?
Yeah.
How can it get us to improve our lives and be less exhausted? So, what about changing that premise? And, having an AI as a coach is a really good start. But the coach with the goal of, helping people, making people's lives, not pushing us in a direction toward burnout, basically. And I think that's not really carefully thought out at this point. I think from what I've been seeing, the visions are, helping produce more reports and more analyses and, more documents. But what about helping people, right? Helping us improve our well-being.
Yeah, that's a critical piece of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's hard to talk about attention and all of this without redefining work in some way, because, it's where a lot of our time is and attention is spent. So how do you not say, well, if it's broken, so is work, then therefore work is broken. And then you go, great, what is work and what does fixed look like and why do we work? And I always end up back at like the simple explanation that work is like where we get paid to help others, and that the more valuable that is perceived in the world by others, the more we get paid. And that's a great spin on it, but then at what cost to yourself? And how do you strike that balance? And this is where I kind of think about companies being like, their order of things are shareholder first, customer second, employee last. So employees there to make the shareholder happy first, then the customer, and then they're at the end of the line, right? Which feels a lot like my perception of what it's like to be a mom. Like you're the last one in the rung, which then just whole nother episode again gets into like, you're really at the end if you're a mom, because you're like, after you've taken care of the customer, then it's the family, then it's like you're so far back at the end of the line that you get nothing for yourself.
Right. And as a mom, you're also not appreciated and you're blamed for everything.
Right. And like, no wonder, like, is it not what we do, but just the order of which we, like, why shareholders first? Why not employees first, customer second, shareholder third? Like, why not, like, take care of yourself, and a happy employee will make for a happy customer, which will make for a happy, is it possible that it's not like the design of work that's broken, but the value, like the system that we have for putting shareholders at the front of the line and, putting moms at the back of the line and then, workers somewhere in the middle. I mean, I don't know. And again, it's a whole nother avenue to go down, but is it possible to redesign your workday when the premise, as you said, is wrong?
Yeah, it's a challenge. We need a sea change in our work culture. And the sea change is to completely change our framing about how we perceive work and to put well-being first and foremost. And then productivity will follow, because there is a lot of work in psychology that shows that when people feel positive, when their well-being is good, they will produce more. They will be more creative. But it's hard for people to be creative when they're stressed and when they're burnt out. And that's where a lot of employees are at. And, I speak with a lot of people, a lot of knowledge workers who report that they're just at the end of their ropes. They feel pulled in all different directions. And of course, they have to satisfy their bosses. They have personal lives that they have to deal with, but there are carryover effects, because when you leave work, you don't have the resources to be able to deal in your personal life. So, yeah.
I was going to ask you, like, in this chain of priority, prioritizing others, and cognitive load, and going is there a good cognitive load because it's for yourself and it's what you want to do and it's your prediction and you're trying to see if it's your creativity, versus the cognitive load of doing something at the service of others, that maybe aren't going to appreciate it, like you said. There's a quality of load that could give us more energy, and that when it's, exerting that energy for something that you're not going to be appreciated for and doesn't benefit you at all. This is what's in it for you, right? Nothing. Does that take a heavier tax on us?
Of course it does. Because when we do things that we're internally motivated to do, intrinsically motivated, right, we have so much more energy, so much more cognitive energy to do it. We are empowered when we can make our own decisions, decide on our own course. And, sure, we'll make mistakes, but that's okay, because we're the ones responsible for the mistakes. We can learn from that. But when we're being told what we need to do, right, where is the empowerment, right? We don't,
right.
And it also eats into the commitment that we have for doing something, because it's, we're someone else's decision about what we should do.
Yeah, we had an earlier conversation in a podcast with Lisa Barrett, and she talks about, our brains are prediction machines. Generally, we just go from one prediction to the next. And of course, I can't help but internalize that myself and think, and time for me is about the degree in which I can't wait to see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. And happiness is when when things are unexpectedly more positive than I expected, and I'm unhappy when things turn out less positively than I expected. And so expectations are really just predictions, and in this chain of predictions that I do all day and see if I'm right. But when someone else tells you to do something, it's their prediction, not your prediction. And so there's no interest to see if they're right or wrong, or less interest. Like, we want to know if our own predictions are right or wrong. That's what moves us through life. That's what gets us in the zone. Proving someone else's predictions probably gets them in the zone, but not us in the zone.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have thoughts around that
I'm
idea of
connecting
prediction and
this
how it falls
to
into it.
the discussion about AI. So imagine that AI is telling us what tasks we should be doing. And it's also evaluating these tasks and saying, here's what you did right, here's what you did wrong. That certainly is very different than if we have, through our own volition, make choices about what we want to do.
Right.
So, I am in favor of having AI guide us or give us the information we need to make better decisions about what we should do, how we should perform work. But I'm really totally against having AI do the work for us, or rather dictate to us how we should be doing our work.
Yeah. Well, to your point earlier, we tend to predict, and then we get excited when we're right, and no one's, your point around thunking or rote tasks is, it's something we have to do to be human. There's no one's going to take that away from us. We're going to keep doing it, and maybe we're going to keep predicting things ourselves, and we're going to keep wanting to know if we're right, and we're not going to offload this because that's just what life is predicting the next thing and seeing if we're right. And it's not fun if the AI predicts it and we find out if the AI is right, because it may as well just be another human being, maybe even worse. We don't care if it's right. It's just an AI. We don't even have a connection to it. So yeah, maybe that's just something that we'll always want to predict, because that's part of living, and we're not going to offload that stuff. That'd be
if
nice.
AI is like really good at, if it becomes really deft at providing us with good choices, like especially I guess if you're co-creating, co-botting, we've called it, like with an AI to help maximize your attention, it's learning from you, and it's giving you, like, ideally could give you like the best possible options, but it's not telling you what to do. It's saying, like, today you wanted to accomplish these things. Here are a couple of like models for what your day could look like to get to that. And then that almost seems like it would have that effect you're talking about, Rob, where it's like you're predicting more or as much, but you're actually, the incidences of the predictions being rewarding actually goes up a little bit, because it's giving you like really well curated summarizations of things and ideas about what you might want to do. So
yeah, if it can help us learn, right, so that we can learn ourselves about what our capabilities are, things we do that will lead to success and failures, right? So by giving us more information, can we learn better from it?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're about to find out, right?
This is great. Yeah, this was a great conversation, guys. A lot to reflect on for me. I think what I like most is the designing our experience and designing our day and taking that moment to do that, and then hopefully it turns out the way we want it to. I think it could be a big step in at least dealing with where we are today until these values, or this sort of systemic change of valuing, things valuing ourselves last. We can, until that our structure, our society starts to create a little more balance between valuing ourselves. I think I'm speaking more for people down the food chain, in companies, but yeah.
There's a lot that goes into making a cultural change, and it proceeds step by step. And so we have to think about the small steps that we can take.
So true.
That makes perfect sense.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Gloria.
Guys. Thanks
really
for your time, and thanks for joining us. And
it was my pleasure.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining this ongoing conversation about conversational AI. Be sure to subscribe to Invisible Machines wherever you get your podcasts, and if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review on the Apple Podcast app. You can also watch these conversations on the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. This podcast is produced for UX Magazine in partnership with OneReach.ai. Over the past 5 years, our team of nearly 200 engineers, scientists, experienced designers, anthropologists, and linguists have been developing Generative Studio X, an award-winning platform that has the lone distinction of being named a leader by every major analyst group. GSX is a complete environment for hosting, creating, analyzing, and scaling your own digital teammates called Intelligent Digital Workers. For an interactive demo of IDWs in action and to learn more about the GSX platform, head to OneReach.ai. This podcast would not be possible without the hard work and dedication of executive producer Elias Parker and producer Kate Timchenko. Our video and audio editor is Michael Litvinov, and we rely on support from the marketing team at OneReach.ai, including Allison Harshberger, Anastasia Nechtalio, and Vera Prokodko. Thanks again, and we look forward to connecting with you next week, right here on Invisible Machines.